Hi, everybody. A very good early morning in Singapore, Malaysia, and Indonesia, and good afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world watching this webcast. We're so excited to share this event with Oscar winner Peter Ramsey with all of you now, and the time is finally here. So thank you for making the time and supporting us. I'm Michael Lim, the Festival Director of Animation Nation and or the host of this webcast. This is the 20th year of our founding since 2004, and early in March, we announced the very first animation competition dedicated to Southeast Asian film creators called Lightbox under our Animation Festival. More information is on our website, which we will post later. A few housekeeping rules. We will open the Q&A later in the chat, and due to time, we won't be able to answer all of them, but we will try our best to get to as many of them as answered as possible. This session is also being recorded. And without further ado, let me introduce to you our speakers today. We have Bervyn Chua, a Singaporean CG filmmaker who will be in conversation with Peter. Bervyn is a Singaporean CG filmmaker making cultural action shorts in Unreal Engine. He strives to promote and create Southeast Asian entertainment that appeals to a global audience. His works incorporate virtual production and motion capture with traditional CG pipelines, with films featured at the INSC Film Festival and also Unreal Engine's Virtual Production Challenge. Follow him on Instagram at BervynC. And also the bio of our very honored guest, Peter Ramsey. Peter began his career as a storyboard artist on a number of feature films such as Bram Stoker's Dracula, Boys in the Hood, Minority Report, and Fight Club. Entering the world of feature animation, he directed DreamWorks Animation's Rise of the Guardians in 2012 and was a director on Sony Pictures Animation Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse in 2018, which won the Academy Award for Best Animated Feature. Currently, Peter is developing and producing both live-action and animated projects. His latest is the Netflix miniseries Lost Ollie. And now I'll leave you in the good hands of Bervyn, who will be in conversation with Peter. The floor is yours, Bervyn.
Hi, Peter again. Hello.
Hey, Bervyn. How are you, man?
So, fun fact, Michael has been mentioning to me, did you know if you Google what's the coolest animation, it's always Spider-Verse that comes up first.
Yeah, actually, it's not just the coolest animation, it's the coolest animation in the world.
In the world.
Wow. Okay.
But yeah,
That's
how
pretty
you
good.
been? I've been following your Insta. I see you post a lot about your puppy Frida recently.
Oh yeah. She's laying right in back of my chair, kind of like looking bored, wondering when I'm going to be done. So that's Frida.
It's cute. But then how about work? I remember you were working on Love in Vain and Bloodcount, your recent projects.
Yeah, those are two live action projects that have been in development for a little while. In the movie business, a lot of times you work on projects a long time before they ever see the light of day, and sometimes it seems like they're not going to happen, and then miraculously they start happening again. So both of those kind of fall into that category. They're both live action movies. Blood Count is sort of a supernatural thriller that I wrote, and Love in Vain is the story of the blues musician Robert Johnson, who was sort of like the most influential blues man of all time. And there's the legend about him that he sold his soul to the devil to be able to be the best guitarist. So that's a project about this kind of the story of his life and the legend of his life. And that's another one that recently kind of started bubbling up again. So I may start working on that pretty soon. But those are two live action things, and there's other animated things I'm involved with, and there's just a bunch of like little pots on my stove that I have to keep stirring every once in a while.
That's a lot of pots. And you just came back from this Lightbox Expo animation talk as well? That was last year?
Well, let me see. Lightbox was a little while ago, I think. That was when was Lightbox? That might have been like this past summer or something like that.
Oh, right.
But
Because
yeah, the Lightbox here. I can't remember exactly when it was. Michael Lim, maybe you remember, but it was it was a little while back, and that was a lot of fun.
Okay.
That was I did that with Phil Lord and Jorge
Yeah.
Gutierrez.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we
so
talked about writing for animation.
Right. I'm actually wanting to ask because the video just came up like 1 or 2 weeks ago.
Ah,
I was like
okay.
rushing through it. So from your experience, did you learn anything or do you have anything you feel could be really good for us to learn from that talk?
Oh, from Lightbox. Oh gosh. I've just learned once again how funny and interesting Jorge and Phil are. Um, I, I, I think as far as I can remember it, we were talking about things like how to bring some of your own perspective into your work as a writer, um, how to make sure your your connect your work you're expressing uh, themes or ideas that the audience can connect with and understand, being clear in your work, but really kind of writing, trying to be authentic and bring some of real life into your work, even if you're writing about something that's got a lot of fantasy or imagination in it. You still want to connect with the audience's emotions and feelings so that they get something out of the experience of the movie.
So that explains why even though like Love in Vain is about Robert Johnson, I read that you're infusing a bit of like the relationship between you and your own father into that story.
I think anytime anyone writes anything, they can't help putting some of their own life into it. I think the other one, Blood Count, is the one that draws a little bit on my family's history.
Oh, it's
And
Blood
it's
Count.
it's not that my father was a jazz musician or that he made a deal with the devil or anything like that, but he did. The characters in Blood Count, that movie is set in Los Angeles in the late 1950s, and that's when my mother and father first came to LA. So
Hmm.
it's kind of about the world that my mom and dad came into in Los Angeles before I was born.
Well, there's a lot of this mix of reality and fantasy. And like you said,
Right, yeah.
yeah, when even writing about fantasy, it's good to have a bit of that realism in there. So I'm
Absolutely.
curious, you came back, you also worked on Ahsoka recently.
Yes.
And
Yeah, that was Ahsoka. Wow,
yeah.
it is quite. I think I shot it in 2022, and it came out in the summer of 2023.
And for that one, I'm really curious, like Star Wars has such a huge amount of lore and backstory. And when you took the helm,
Yes.
how much of it did you have to absorb before, you felt comfortable?
Oh, sorry, I've got to plug in my plug here. There we go. I had been absorbing Star Wars all my life. I mean, that was the very first Star Wars. I'm old enough to have seen it in a movie theater, and that really is probably the movie that got me more interested in movies than anything else. So I've been a fan of Star Wars and the franchise really uh, for all of my adult life for sure. So by the time I got to Ahsoka, it was a thing where I didn't, I hadn't watched all the animated series and I didn't know that much about all the history of the characters. I had to learn a little, but the feel of Star Wars, that was something that had never left me. So that was easy for me to call on and sort of like, put into my understanding of directing that show. And it was a dream come true because I had done an episode of The Mandalorian, several months before that, but on Ahsoka, I got to do Jedi's and lightsabers and the Force, all that stuff, and it was like a dream come true. It was really, really fun. It was fantastic.
So you're almost like a kid in the candy store, right,
Oh
Peter?
yeah, I was definitely the kid in the candy store, man. I was taking as much candy as I could get. It was amazing.
Did you
It
get to
was
keep
really
a
amazing.
lightsaber by any chance? No.
I wish. Are you kidding? I wish. Wow. No, it was, but it was great though. I mean, they're really, Dave Filoni, who created Ahsoka, and Jon Favreau, who created The Mandalorian. Those guys, they're the godfathers of the whole thing. They're just fantastic to work with, and they're huge fans themselves. So it's a great atmosphere to work in.
Hmm. Then, okay, well, no, that's spoiler territory, so I won't say too much, but the idea of bringing back this long time favorite character, was it from you or was it something the studio requested?
Oh no, that's something that was in the plan when
Oh,
they were writing all the episodes for the season. So that was yeah, those shows, they try to keep as much secret as from as many people as possible because they don't want stuff to leak out and spoil the show.
mm.
So even for us directors, I saw maybe one other script in addition to mine just to help me understand the context of what was happening in my episode. But I didn't know, like, what was happening 2 or 3 episodes after mine. So I just had to watch on Disney Plus like everybody else. But yeah, I didn't. I had influence over my own particular episode in storytelling in small ways, but big decisions like bringing a character back or stuff like that. That's all that's the job of Dave Filoni and the writers.
John, which is really interesting to me because you're mentioning like, yes, there's some things that are not in your control, but
Hmm.
with your experience working with like things that were pre-existing, like Ahsoka and Star
Hmm.
Wars, and even Lost Ollie,
Hmm.
I'm curious, like, how do you know how much to adapt something into something totally new from your own standpoint, and
Right.
how do you like, not upset the fans by going too far away from what is actually faithful to the original?
Yeah. Sure, that's a good question, and it's a tricky balance. I know on Spider-Man there was so much in that movie, but for us we were lucky because there's so much Spider-Man. There's so much history to Spider-Man that we felt as long as we were true to the spirit of it, and we didn't try to change who Spider-Man was,
Mm.
even though we were bringing in a new Spider-Man, he still had to do the same things that Spider-Man traditionally did. He had to, like Miles Morales, just like Peter Parker, he gets his powers, but he can't solve all his problems. He's still got problems at school. He's got problems with his family, problems with his girlfriend. It's all the same things that make Spider-Man Spider-Man, and the idea of with great power comes great responsibility. That there are bad things that come along with being Spider-Man, but you can't give up being a hero just because it gets kind of tough. That's sort of the essence of Spider-Man that we wanted to preserve because, we know if we didn't have that, it really would be a different character and that people wouldn't respond to that. But everything else about it could be new and fresh. So it's a balance between holding on to the stuff that really makes the character who they are while putting them in a new setting or giving them some new things to bounce off of so it all feels fresh and different.
So like holding on to the core of the story, like what, Star Wars with light and dark, Spider-Man with, the idea of, perseverance, and then just changing
Mm,
the outside flesh to be something new.
100%. Yeah, completely. That's exactly what it is.
Then then I guess maybe for Spider-Verse also, like working on so many different Spider-Man stories, not just on Miles Morales, but with
Mm.
the I forgot her name, the Penny and Nick
Oh
Cage
yeah.
Spider-Man Noir.
Mm-hmm.
There's so
Mm-hmm.
many different backstories, and I'm curious how, like between you, Bob Perchetti, Rodney Rothman, how did you guys like split the thinking of the story?
Oh yeah. Yeah, it wasn't just us either. It was also Phil Lord.
Mm,
Phil Lord and Chris Miller. They, put a ton of work in on the writing side. It was, on Spider Verse there were things that all of us did together, but there were other things where we leaned into our own particular superpower or skill that we had. Like I come mostly out of story, out of animation, out of being a story artist. So we reached a point in the production where, like I said, we'd been doing all these other things together. We were all in the edit room together, giving notes and story suggestions. We were kind of all directing actors at different times. Sometimes I would do it. Uh, sometimes Bob would do it. Sometimes we'd do it together. Uh, but and edit story art meetings we were all in together, all giving our notes.
Mm.
But there came a point when, you know, as production was rolling along, there was so much animation coming in at the same time that there needed to be more story art for our third act. We were trying to figure out our third act, and we just didn't have script pages yet. So I had to go off and start boarding a lot of the stuff in the third act, while Bob stayed with the animators and worked on the animation day to day, because that's a lot of animation to get through. So things like that would happen where we would lean into our particular skill, and then Rodney and Phil would be working on the script writing, because Rodney's primarily a writer. So then we would come back together again and do those other things like directing the actors or whatever. So it kind of was an organic flow where we would kind of go wherever we were most needed, depending on what our particular strength was.
It's really starting to sound like every film should have like 3 directors now.
Well, I honestly don't know how we could have finished that movie with only one. I really don't. It was a monster.
Well, it turned out really great though, and I'm sure you know.
Oh, thank you.
Well then, yeah, I think it's a good time to get into. You mentioned you were doing a lot of storyboarding for Spider-Verse, and that's how you started. You know, you got your foot in the door.
Yes.
Yeah. Is there anything you want to talk about that?
Sure. Yeah. I originally was a live action storyboard artist before I ever worked in animation. So when I started in the movie business, I didn't really have any thought of working in animation, strangely enough. I had drawn all my life, and I kind of fell in love with movies, and the way for me to be able to sort of get my foot in the door and start working on them was through storyboarding. So I got to work with once I kind of got into the industry. I started by working on commercials. I had signed on with this agency that represented storyboard artists mainly for commercial work, and I storyboarded commercials for like a year. And at the end of that year, this agency got me a job on a movie, and I got to I got to work on an actual movie. It never got made, but I got to work with the director and a cinematographer. We storyboarded the whole movie, and I came out of that with a lot of experience and a lot of samples, and I started getting work on big studio movies. Like I think the very first one I worked on, I think, was one of the Nightmare on Elm Street movies.
Right. Yes.
With Freddy Krueger, like Nightmare on Elm Street 5, maybe it was.
Oh yeah.
And then from there, it was just like all through the 90s. I was working on all sorts of movies with lots of people, Ron Howard and Steven Spielberg and David Fincher and Spike Jonze and you name it, just all these like tons and tons of movies. And it was like a film school for me. I really learned a lot about filmmaking and writing. I kind of started writing during that period myself. I was writing my own scripts, so I've got a big stack of those which never got made. It wasn't until quite a bit further on, a producer that I had worked with on a movie called Tank Girl had gone on to DreamWorks Animation to produce the Shrek movies, and he kind of coaxed me over there to come check the place out. And like I said, I hadn't really been thinking about animation, but I was kind of intrigued by CG animation and where it was going back then. And when I went to visit DreamWorks, it's this beautiful campus here in Glendale in California, and it's like it's like going to a really super nice college. And there's like there's free food at the cafeteria, and there's fountains, and it's just this beautiful place. I was like, wow, I just want to like live here. I can't believe how nice they treat the artists here. It's gorgeous. Everybody has nice offices. And I was like, yeah, I could try this out for a little while. And it was then that I learned how different animation story art was from live action storyboarding, because they're two totally different crafts. So I had to learn how to do animation story And then I really started falling in love with the process of animation and understanding how it's as Aaron, the producer who had me come over there, told me, it's a very pure form of cinema.
Aaron, as in Aaron Warner, the Warner Brothers guy.
Aaron Warner.
Right,
Correct.
yeah.
Aaron Warner.
I have a quote from him.
Really,
He's like, he says you have a
Yeah.
really good combination of skills.
well, he has a really good combination of skills as well. He's a brilliant guy, and he really was the force behind kind of pulling the first couple of Shrek movies together. So
yeah,
and that was how I ended up in animation.
Which is like a really cool thing, from like a guy who likes comics, just drawing, and then working onto films, horror films no less, from horror to Spielberg stuff, and now animation and everything in between.
Yeah.
I think it just comes to show that, whatever you first set out to do, things can change, and in a good way.
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. If you're open-minded, and if you want to learn, if you're really interested in the craft of what you're doing, and you really want to learn more, and you're willing to try, anything and learn anything, then you can go a long way, and it's very enjoyable. I mean, I never knew that things would quite develop that way, and I originally wanted to be a director. I wanted to start right at the top, and I made it there eventually, but along the way, I learned so much, and I experienced so much that it's pretty amazing the way things came together.
Right. And you mentioned one point about learning, like this huge difference between live action and animation. And I read in one of your interviews, you said even for Rise of the Guardians, you brought in more of this live action thinking, even though it was animation. So I'm curious, to you, what is the difference to you about, live action and animation storytelling or storyboarding?
Good question. I guess I would say I think part of the reason that I started getting into animation in terms of CG animation was that I could feel the depths in a different way than a lot of, up to that point, except for like maybe the great Disney movies. So much 2D animation was done with TV in mind, and kind of TV thinking and aesthetics, which is, it's sort of flat and it's a little objective. But in live action, and now of course, more and more in CG and whatever, you have depth, and you're really dealing with space in a different way, and you can kind of like immerse in the atmosphere of a scene or a shot. And the way you use camera is in live action or in CG animation is all more about experiencing depth and putting yourself in the world of the characters instead of sitting back and watching like a flat graphic image. So it's kind of a subtle difference, but that's what excited me about working in CG animation, was the idea that you could take animation and experience it a little more in the way you did a live action movie, where you could be more surrounded by the world instead of slightly removed from it. I think that probably is the feeling I was kind of really going for. And then there's also a level of realism, not necessarily just making things photorealistic, but kind of realism in the performances of the characters, and the emotion and the subtle details of performance that when we're watching somebody in a live action movie, we kind of take it in very quickly, because we recognize those very small things that humans do with their faces or their posture or their gestures, because we do them all the time ourselves, and we see it every day, and that it communicates something to us very quickly when we see it on screen. And I wanted to have the same way that, like, I was very inspired by a guy like Brad Bird. I think his the animated performances in his CG films are just spectacular, and they use a lot of those little cues and imperfections and very human details to communicate emotion and humor and what a character's thinking or feeling, all those things. So that part of it, to be able to build a performance of a character from the ground up in animation, was the other thing that really got me excited, that you could really communicate subtle emotion through animation. That idea really blew me away, and I really tried to push for that. And I've tried to do it in the stuff that I've done.
Oh yeah, I mean, we can definitely see it in Rise of the Guardians. I don't know how many times I cried in that movie with the acting.
Oh, thank you. I'm gonna cry now.
And I think, yeah, what you said is really true about the depth, because I read you said somewhere like this idea of moving the camera around, making it feel like you're in the space, and this caused one of the movies you worked on to be one of the most difficult to storyboard, and you said it was The Panic Room with David Fincher. If that's correct.
Yeah.
Because I'm guessing now, because there was a lot of like impossible cuts, flying through walls, that mirror shot, like going through mirrors.
Actually, that wasn't the toughest part of it. A lot of times, stuff like that is pretty easy. The thing about Panic Room was that David Fincher has very specific ideas about when he wants to move the camera, and I'm just talking about on a normal scene where you're dealing with people in a room. He has very specific reasons why he does what he does with the camera, and what lens he's going to use, and how high off the ground. He's very specific about all that stuff. So that was, for me, Panic Room was a great education in asking yourself why you're doing certain things in a shot or in a scene, and how what's the psychological reason to have a camera over someone's shoulder as opposed to just having a clean point of view of the person that they're talking to, or there's how you compose a frame and who has the dominant position, and all that stuff. That's really, you can't really put your finger on it as you're watching a movie, but it's having an effect on you. It's having an emotional or psychological effect on you, and that's really part of the craft of filmmaking. And that's really important and fascinating. It's kind of it's invisible, and it's one of the coolest things is when someone tells you they were emotionally affected by something, but they don't quite understand why. And that's because of the work that you're doing as a director or a cinematographer or whatever behind the scenes to give those scenes some kind of subtext and some kind of meaning, and not just what the characters are saying.
Well, I love that there is so much weight to what you're saying about acting, every camera move being motivated. And then I remember that one of the first animation you directed was Monsters versus Aliens, which nobody would have guessed is something serious or nuanced.
All right.
So
and it's not.
yeah, how was that for you? Especially now I want to talk about like sound design. I saw that Monsters versus Aliens, you did some voice acting as well, if you remember.
Oh yeah, there's the feature Monsters versus Aliens. I was the head of story on that. So, but after that experience, they said, "Hey, we want to do a television Halloween special. So could you direct that?" And that was like a half hour, 20-something minute piece. And I said, "Sure, that's great. I can start learning how to direct here at DreamWorks." And so that was the first thing. That was the first animation I directed at DreamWorks, and that was a little short show with that had the Monsters versus Aliens characters, and there were these crazy. It was Halloween, and there were these pumpkins that got, some alien goo fell on these pumpkins, and it brought them to life and gave them little crazy personalities. And it was very silly. It was all comedy, and it was pretty goofy, but it was really fun. And we tried to give it. We wanted to give it enough of the feeling and the size of a big movie on our little TV budget and scope, and we had a lot of fun with it. So it was sort of a little bit of an homage to like old 1950s monster movies with all the corny stuff and the silly comedy. But yeah, we really tried to put a lot into it.
And with your seat on, the director's chair, do you also talk a lot with the sound designers, like for Monsters vs. Aliens, to get that 50s monster mash kind of vibe?
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, anything you do, that's another great thing that you learn when you have the job of directing one of these. You learn how important every single stage is. From storyboarding to the design to animation to rigging and modeling and lighting, all that stuff, and every single one of those phases, it's you're bringing more to the story, and you're bringing more of the story out, and you can really do that a lot with sound. The sound design, the designing the individual sound effects, the sounds themselves, what things sound like, and also the sound mix. That was the big one for me, learning about how much you can change a film just through the sound mix, how you emphasize certain sounds, how you create the feeling of being in a certain kind of environment just by what you're doing with the sound, how you can how you use sound strategically. You take it out sometimes, and then you emphasize it at other times to create different effects, to draw the audience's attention to something, or keep it off something. There's so much you can do. We always used to say it's like you get another pass at writing the script when you do the sound. You can change the story that much.
So from what you're saying, the sound comes in as early as the script for you. Like you start imagining it.
But thinking about it, sure, thinking about it, yeah. But it actually is one of the last things you really do in the process. I think pretty much the last thing you do is the final sound mix. That's the last thing where you really you're really tightening all the little screws and making sure everything is the level that you want it to be at.
I think it's really interesting that, it's the first thing you think of, you hold it off, and then you think about it again at the very end.
Yeah.
Goes the whole lifetime of a movie. And I guess another thing that's like the lifeblood of movies is, as a producer and a executive producer yourself, I assume you generally have a lot of budgets and timelines to deal with. So as a creative, how do you feel on balancing these forces in terms of priorities and constraints between, creativity and timeline budgets, these pressures?
Right. Yeah. I'm in my capacity as a producer or executive producer. I'm really much more on the creative side. I'm aware of budget issues and things like that, but I don't have to get into the specifics of them unless, I have to have an understanding of, things cost money, and sometimes you can't spend as much as you would like. Sometimes you're not going to be able to afford an extra costume for a character. You're going to have to find a solution that allows you to get around that, or you're not going to be able to afford to build this set that you might, want to have, or you have to come up with alternate ideas for things. So my experience of dealing with budgets and timelines and things like that, it's sort of, at this point for me, I guess I've lived with it long enough that it's just another part of the process, and it's just an awareness that sometimes you have to find creative ways to do things that aren't what you originally had in mind. But that also leads you to better ideas sometimes, and it also, what it also does is having the restraint of a budget or of a schedule forces you to make sure that the stuff you're spending your time and money on is stuff that you really, really need in the movie. And when you really have to look at, whatever it is, a scene or a character or whatever, and you ask yourself, do I really need this, or would the story be fine without it? You get rid of it, because usually the less you need in a story, the better. The simpler things can be, the better. And there are some things you really, really passionately think you need for a long time, and when when you're faced with the choice of getting rid of that or keeping something else, and you decide to keep the other thing that you know you need, the story gets stronger. So it's really for me, it's as weird as it is to say, sometimes like a thing like a budget or a deadline can be a creative tool to force you to find the best solution, or to make you realize what's really essential about the film, because 9 times out of 10 you could get along with a lot less than you think you need.
It's
I
true.
also just want to mention to our audience also that we'll be taking some Q&A questions. So if you have any questions for Peter, please put it in the Q&A box in your viewer, so we can have some questions for Peter later as well. Thank you.
All right.
Bring them on.
Let's do it. But yeah, so from what you're saying, it's really like it, instead of it being a pressure or constraint, these constraints actually help you to thrive more, help you to see what's important. It creates a box, but it allows you to know what you need inside that box.
Yes, I mean, they can. Believe me, if I could have it my way, I wouldn't have it. I wouldn't have any budget or any deadlines. But I recognize that they exist, and sometimes they can help you. They can help you to better solutions.
I think that's really good. And in a more macro aspect, something we can't really control, like say the international market. In that context, what I saw happen really interestingly in South Africa was with Kisazimoto and Triggerfish, and you had a big part in that as well. So I'm really curious, seeing that happen. How did it come to fruition? How did some country with already like a huge amount of talent wanting to be out there in the world suddenly get this opportunity to showcase their skills?
Yeah, it was interesting. I in 2019, after Spider-Verse, I got invited to the Cape Town, South Africa Film Festival, and I had been invited actually the year before that, but I couldn't go because we were so busy on the movie. But I really wanted to. I had never visited Africa before, so I was excited to go. And when I went, I was, the animation community in South Africa, it was so like just exploding with energy and talent and a desire to really show what they could do. And I met a lot of great people, and I just told them, wow, look, if you guys are ever, I'd love to help in any way I could to help get more exposure for what you guys are doing, because there's such a great energy. And I partnered up with when I was there, I met these folks at the studios Triggerfish, and they were saying like their dream was kind of like to produce some sort of anthology of the work that was going on in South African animation at the time. And about a year later, after I was there, they got in touch with me and said they had been talking to Disney Plus, and Disney Plus was actually interested in doing something like that. And so I said, sign me up. I'd love to come aboard. I'd love to, work with the artists and, creatively consult and work on developing the stories and whatever we could do to get it going. And it really took off. Disney Plus was really great about supporting the project. And we worked on it for probably 2.5, 3 years, with whittled a lot of submissions down to 10 projects. They're all written and created by African artists and writers and directors. And it was a fantastic time. That's one of the most rewarding and enjoyable things I've ever done, because everybody there was so talented. I mean, they're super, just like, the big thing for them was to really be on a platform that was big, that took them, bigger than just Africa. I say just Africa, but Africa's huge. There's so many countries. There's so many. There's such a a thriving animation industry there, but to introduce that to the rest of the world, which didn't know what was going on, and there's so much going on, was a great thing. So yeah, that was a fantastic experience, and it's I think a couple of the shorts are being expanded into TV shows, and a lot of the artists are, they're a lot of them were like writing and doing stuff already, so they're on to more things, and it's great. So it's we all kind of bonded together as a unit. So it was an amazing experience.
Oh, can't wait for Makuzi TV show.
That's right. I think they are developing that. Yeah.
Oh, it's Makuzi. Okay.
I think Makuzi is. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So good.
All right. Oh man. Then I think it's really interesting because, like, yes, there is a lot of this Afrofuturism in Kizazi Moto, but you can also feel a bit of this like Western influence on it with like Love, Death, Robots and sci-fi. So I'm curious, with your experience, you worked on this Chinese Rise of the Guardians before Rise of the Guardians with Avi Arad, you mentioned.
Actually, it was after that. It was after Rise of the Guardians. It was before Spider-Verse, and it's kind of connected to Spider-Verse because Avi was also a producer on Spider-Verse. So it kind of ties into the story of how I got onto Spider-Verse. But yeah, it was a project he was trying to get off the ground. It was being co-produced by a couple of big Chinese corporations, and it was going to be a big like Chinese mythological story that had the feeling of, it felt a little like Rise of the Guardians or Avengers or something like that, but it was all based in Chinese mythology, and it was a really fun project, and I worked on it for like a year. But like a lot of those projects do, one of those companies decided to pull out, and then the whole thing started to crumble, and I was out of a job for a little while, and then Bob Persichetti called me up from Spider-Verse and said, "Hey, I heard you got some time on your hands. Could you come over and do a little storyboarding on Spidey?" And I said, "Sure, I would love to." And that's sort of how I ended up over on Spider-Verse.
So despite all this, like working not only with African culture, with Chinese culture, in your experience, to craft a story like with 5X structure and all that, is it mostly universal for you, or do you have to pick up different ways of telling a story for different cultures?
Oh yeah, that you always do. Most of it's universal, and I think the universal part is really and using film technique to make things clear, to be clear about what you're saying. But as to the things you have to say, like, it was interesting, to your point, working on the China project, there were specific cultural things about storytelling that are very different from what most Western audiences are used to, or just in the form of storytelling. There's ways that characters are expected to progress through a story that are different, as far as we understood, in the Chinese model versus the typical Western model. So it was an interesting way in different ways of thinking of how stories relate to people, what people are used to culturally, how people in different cultures communicate, and the things that they, it's kind of the way that they see people is a little bit different. So it was really interesting to sort of work with that and figure out how to make that work in a way that I also felt like I was telling a good story.
Okay, Peter, just let you know, we've got some time now for Q&A. We have some questions that just come in. So
bring them on.
Yeah, sure. So we got a question from Arno. He says, "Hi, Peter, really lovely to have the opportunity to hear from you. I aspire to break into the animation industry with industry with a background in computer science, and I'm on my way to pursuing postgraduate studies to see the dream through. I have two questions. Wow. With the increasing competition to break into animation and also increasing globalization of studio work from Australia to India to the UK to the US, what are the concrete technical steps you would advise someone just starting out to take?" That's the first question. And do you want to answer that one first?
Sure, I could try.
Okay.
It's tricky because it's going to be different for everyone, depending on really depending on what they're really interested in. Because it's a profession where if you don't really love what you're doing, if you're not really into it, it's going to take so much effort and so much time and so much investment, so much personal investment in the work that yeah, it has to be something you're truly interested in doing to have a real to have a good experience doing it. Otherwise you
Okay.
might as well go sell shoes or something. So I
Yeah.
would I would say the people I know that tend to be the most successful are the people who can see the whole the whole um, kind of who could see a project as a whole. No matter
Mm.
what their job in it is, they realize that they're there to help tell a story. So the more that you can learn about story, the more you understand, why things in stories are important. For example, if you're a rigger and you're working with rigging characters, understanding why the character is doing things in the story that they're doing. What's their function in the story? How does that dictate how they're going to move? What their silhouette is? What their physical presence is? All that ties into their role in the story. So the more you
Yeah.
know about the story that the particular project is telling, the more that informs the work you're doing, the more valuable you are to me as a director, for sure, because then I know that you understand what I'm trying to do, and the more effective you are in helping to tell the story as a whole. So those are the people, the ones who see themselves as storytellers, no matter what they're doing, no matter what
Yeah.
their craft is. Those are the ones that are going to advance and have more success.
Yeah, I guess in a sense, it's also about contributing to the whole aspect of storytelling. The more you can contribute
Absolutely.
to the team, yeah. So the second
Yep.
part of the question
100%.
is, could you share more about your journey from storyboarding to directing? I think we've already covered that one. And also, what are all the different pathways to get to be a director in animation?
Yeah. I mean,
Mm,
I'm going to sound like a broken record, but I'll take you back to the same answer I just gave. It's all about
mm,
story. There's so many animation directors that come out of I think the primary places animation directors come from is story artists or writers. And both of those crafts, they're all about, how do I tell this story? How do I express the ideas in this script? How do I take this character and make their emotions uh, relatable to the audience? How do I show what this character is feeling and how they evolve through a whole story? And how do I make an audience feel like I want to go on that emotional journey with them? How do I put the audience inside the story? Not just so they're like, sitting and watching it and not being involved in it, but how do I make it feel like they're in that story so that they can't stop
mm,
watching it, so that they're going to remember it for the rest of their lives? All those things that go into that go deeply into storytelling. That's the job of the director. The most important job of the director, in my opinion, is to know the story that you're telling, because that helps communicate to everybody in every department. That answers all the questions. You just have to know the story. That's the most important
mm.
thing. So I would say anybody who wants to be a director, learn as much as you can about story and story structure. Write if you're not writing, just start writing yourself, so you know what it is when you're talking to a writer. You know the process, and you understand how to take a script and interpret it or improve it, you know or to analyze it and see what's wrong, see why a scene isn't working, or
Mm.
why a whole movie isn't working. Oh, it's because this wasn't set up properly in Act 1, that character's motivation is actually not clear, if this is what they actually want to do. Knowing all that stuff, that is the foundation of becoming a good director.
Well, cool. We have a question from Joshua Ashley. Hi, I
Joshua.
noticed you. Hi, I noticed you transitioned from directing to executive producing for the Across and Beyond the Spider-Verse. Could you share what led you to this change and what new responsibilities come with the executive producer role? And thank you.
Yes, you got it. What led me to that transition? I was exhausted. Oh man, those movies are so complex and so hard to make. And
Wow.
I was they actually asked me to come back for the second one probably about 6 months before we were done with the first. And I said, right now, I never want to hear the word Spider-Man again in my life. I want to jump off this building. That's how tough it was working on that, finishing that movie. So the thing to remember is these movies take multiple years to do. So when we were finishing the first one, I was feeling like, yeah, I've had an amazing time on this. I really, I love the character. I love the film. It was really hard. I love the story. But I was kind of getting chances to like do other things. And, I had ambitions. I had scripts I had worked on. I had ideas of my own. And I kind of had to decide, well, I feel like I've just really, come through this big journey on this movie. Do I want to kind of turn around and feel like I'm doing the same thing over again, or do I want to try something new for a little while? And it was tough because I really loved the team and I really loved the project. But they approached me with the idea: would you be an executive producer and you could still be involved? And I was like, that actually sounds great, because I don't really want to leave, and I also want to try these other things. So being an executive producer was a way to still be involved at a much lighter level. I mean, it's more of a creative consultant and another pair of eyes. And honestly, there's so many people on the team, so many smart people on those teams. They don't really need a lot of outside help, So when the new team came together, I would give notes on the script sometimes. I would give notes on some of the cuts. I'd do some scratch in the scratch booth for them. I was like, hey, I'm here to do whatever. A lot of times I would talk to the new directors, and they'd be like, I never want to hear this word Spider-Man again. I want to jump off the top of the building. And I would say, I know what you mean. I was there, but you got to keep going. It's going to be worth it. So that's a lot of what I did. So it's a much removed kind of thing, but I'm still part of I'm like the old grandpa on the porch instead of the young guy in the family. So I'm kind of give my little advice now and then whenever they need it.
Cool. We have another question. Okay, this one is something topical. It's from Lee.
Hey, Lee.
Hi, Peter. What do you think about the future of animation and film with the introduction of AI? And do you personally use it to your workflow?
I think there are definitely some ways in which it can be a very useful tool. Because there's, on Spider-Verse, we did, we called it was machine learning. There were some tasks that, we basically were able to use a form of AI to place the ink lines on the characters' faces. Stuff that would take forever for somebody to have to do frame by frame. If you can train an AI to do something like that, why not? That's one thing. But of course, the problem is, people who are going to use it as a shortcut and not do the actual work, or trying to find a way around the real work of creativity, creating new ideas and not just new techniques or things like that. And that's where the danger of it comes. I tend to think that that people that people can feel the difference, once they get a taste of it, and that it's like, the difference when you see, a real leather jacket versus a fake leather jacket, or real wood versus fake wood, or it's it might be a subtle difference. In some cases it might not matter that much, but I don't know that an AI is ever going to come up with anything as emotionally moving as the best, as the beginning of Pixar's Up. And AI is not going to give you that.
Right.
You can try. You can type an elaborate prompt in and say, make it feel like Pixar's Up. It's never going to make you cry.
Right.
So I tend to think there's still going to be a level at which you're going to be able to feel the human quality in something, and that AI is just not going to be able to beat that. But there are going to be a lot of simple, cheap little things that AI probably will get used for. That's another reason I go back to, if you learn about story, about story. And AI can never duplicate a human connection, human emotional connection with another human being. AI can't do that, and that is what we try to do when we're telling a story.
Right. I have a nice comment from Ishla. I've been on this current passion project for almost 20 years. You, Peter, have inspired me today to continue the dream and see it finished. Thank you for today.
Oh, thank you for telling me that, Ishla. That's beautiful. That's fantastic. And the best, probably the best thing about being lucky enough to have this job is when people let you know that the work that you've done actually affects them in their life. That is huge. It's huge. It's huge to know that you can actually connect with other people through the work that you do. So it really means a lot to me. I'm sure when you finish your project, it's gonna touch somebody else that way, and it's just how we, it's connecting to other people. It's how we, it's if more people did it, it would be a better world, So as long as we keep doing it, as long as we keep putting ourselves sincerely into our art, it's that can only create good things. So thanks so much. That really means a lot to hear that.
Okay, we have a question from Evan. Evan's asking, are there telltales in a screenplay or concept that sort of informs you that will be worth pursuing, or be a film that generates a positive reception?
Oh, well, you never know for sure about the reception. All you can do is try. But if I'm reading something and I feel that that there's I'm looking for the right word. If I can feel that there's a sincerity, or there's like a kind of a direct or an alive quality to it, it's if I can feel that it really is a person writing it, communicating something to me, instead of someone who's who's following some sort of template, or who's following a formula. You read a lot of things that sort of that are just going along beat by beat with other movies you've seen, or other kinds of movies, or it's like there's a character you've seen in 10,000 other movies, or and you just fall asleep. You just kind of, my brain just turns off, and I'm like, I've seen this before. I've felt this before. There's nothing personal about it. It's as if you're talking to somebody, but they're imitating somebody else that you know. And you're like, wait a minute, that's not what. Why should I listen to you if you're just telling me what somebody else said? There's nothing interesting about that. And so I would say and that doesn't mean that the story doesn't have to be super quirky. It doesn't have to be super weird. It doesn't have to be super unusual. It just has to feel like a person gave it some thought and is communicating something that they actually feel about this, or that they, that they're sharing ideas that have that are unique to them. That really is what it's all about for me. That makes the difference in something that I want to keep reading, and something that I like. I pass. you know.
Okay, cool. We have another question from Lee again. Hi,
Lee,
Peter.
you're back.
He's back again. Hi, Peter. What advice would you give for smaller indie studios based on your experience doing commercials and later feature films?
Ooh, man, that's an interesting one. You know, I don't know the business side of it all that well, so it's a little hard for me to comment there. Um, what would I say, man? Gosh, I'm trying to think of something to say that doesn't sound like just a silly cliche. Because I don't, I don't want to pretend like I know that business inside out. Most of my work has been done in much more in the feature and the studio.
I think it's what you were saying earlier, Peter, about story. I mean, it's like, even for small indie studios, you focus on story.
You know what? You're right. I didn't want to sound like I was repeating myself, but I think, yeah, when you're working on things, as you're making your decisions, remember that one way or another, you are telling a story. Bring that into all your decision making, from the design to the writing to the to the actual animation, to the the sets. Every single detail, all of that stuff is in the service of telling the story. Even if it's a commercial or a video, whatever it is, and the more you focus on that, I think the more genuine and relatable the experience of what you're making is going to be. So yeah, thanks, Michael, because I was like, yeah, you're absolutely right, though. It all keeps going back to remembering that you're a storyteller at every single phase of the process.
Right. I think also it's really important, especially for Southeast Asian creators. I don't know if you've had that much experience with creators in this part of the world, but we're trying to promote that through our regional competition now to encourage more talents to tell their own stories as well.
Yes.
So, I mean, coming out from Southeast Asia, are you potentially excited about anything from this region, or?
I know that the most of I know that there's a lot of a lot more artists in the business of of Southeast Asian descent here, whether it's Malaysia or Indonesia or India or Pakistan. There's a lot more presence in the industry in terms of people. I don't think culturally, as far as the projects that have come out, that impact I haven't felt as much yet, but I know it will. I know it's gonna come, because the people are already here.
Right.
And it's a matter of time before that starts to assert itself. I mean, things like in Indian cinema, that's been a presence, and I feel like that's just starting to penetrate the mainstream a little more. I would be I've seen glimpses of projects, stuff that hasn't been made yet, that draws a little bit on some Southeast Asian mythology or lore or culture, and I think it's only a matter of time before something breaks through to really make a strong statement. But I know, because of because of something like Netflix, that has a much more international reach now. The way that Korean films and shows are making a big impact.
Right.
It's a matter of time before there's a Singaporean or an Indonesian or a Malaysian film or TV series that really does the same thing. I definitely think in the animation space, there's a lot of potential there for bringing some authentic culture into the rest of the world's consciousness through animation. I think you guys can. There's got to be like fantastic stuff that the rest of the world just isn't aware of. You know, that
Wow.
that impacts storytelling or design, or whatever facet of the culture there is. There's got to be something there that's going to hit soon.
All right.
That's my feeling.
Yeah, thanks for saying that, Peter. That's really encouraging and inspiring to a lot of our audience as well, because we have a lot of students in animation schools from Singapore, Indonesia, and Malaysia here today also. So I'm well aware that we're running out of time. Thank you so much, Peter, for your generosity. But before we sign off, I'm going to get you to do a speed round.
Okay, here we go.
So the speed round is very simple. You have to name three key takeaways that you follow in your own mantra, that be it advice from somebody or values which you follow in your own career or life. So 3 key takeaways.
3 key takeaways. Okay. Okay, I'm going to be the broken record again. Always ask yourself, what story am I telling? Whenever you have a question, whenever you have to make a decision on a project, and you're confused and you don't know which way to go, ask yourself, wait a minute, what story am I telling? So that can be as simple as, is he wearing a blue jacket or a red jacket? Just go back and see if there's an answer in your story. Is she happy or sad? Is it sunny or rainy in this scene? Go back to the story. And ask yourself, what story am I supposed to be telling right in this moment for this particular thing? And the answer should start to be in there somewhere. Another one, don't give up. If you are running into, people always ask, oh, how do you get past difficulties, or when you're blocked, or when you're discouraged? And I just say, you know what? You have to accept that not everything is going to go right. It's part of life. And it is also part of the artistic and creative process. You're going to run into things that don't go the way that you want them to go. You just have to say, I've run into that thing that isn't going the way it's supposed to go. And you have to find a way around it or through it, or you have to throw it out and come up with another solution, but don't give up. And that means on a larger scale, if you're talking about your career, don't give up. Because I've had several moments in my career that I I really messed up bad, and I thought, oh my God, am I going to get any more jobs? Am I going to work again? I can't get anybody interested in this, or I can't get anybody interested in that. And I could have quit at any one of those points along the way.
Yeah.
And a lot of great things would not have happened.
Right.
So I always tell people, if you really love something, don't give up. Just try to hold on until the difficulty passes or you find a solution. Because if you stop now, you're guaranteed never to get there. If you hold on, going, you might make it.
I always believe that always have a lot of friends and family who love what you do.
Well, you're kind of stealing my third one, because
sorry.
Yeah, my other piece of advice coming right off of that is, remember that your life is bigger than what you're doing. Your life is bigger than just working in animation. You've got a mom and a dad. You've got sisters and brothers. You have a family that loves you, or hopefully you have a family that loves you, or you have you have friends that care about you. You've got a dog or a cat that likes you. So when things go wrong in your career, you're not so overly identified with the work that you do that you feel like you lose everything. I mean, when Rise of the Guardians first came out, it didn't do great in the theaters right away. It was like a kind of a flop. And it was really tough. I had worked really hard on that movie with everybody else who worked on it for 3 years, and we were devastated. But and I think it really could have kept me from moving forward in the industry at all. But I was lucky in that, I have a family. My wife and kids, they loved me even if the movie didn't do great. It wasn't and And I realized, no, we had done a lot of really good work on that movie, and a lot of people really love it. So I kind of realized I'm not a failure just because the movie isn't doing well right now. It's not. I'm not. I am not a failure. I can keep moving on and try to do better next time and learn from this. So
Wow.
I would say don't over identify with the work to the point that that's all you think you are, because you're more than that.
Wow. That's
I
amazing
sound pretty
advice.
deep, don't I? Wow.
It sounds really deep. Okay, thank you so much, Peter. We really appreciate your time and generosity in spending it with us. We really hope to do more with you in the future as well, Peter. And I also, yeah, and I also like to thank Sarah and Priyanka who are working always behind the scenes, and the rest of our Singapore Film Society colleagues. And encouragement, especially our chairman, Kenneth Tan, and our festival is planned for late October in Singapore. So please follow us on IG and Facebook for the latest news and events. Thank you so much. It means so much to me to have you here today. And I just want to leave you with one quote for myself. It's like, everyone counts because everyone matters to us.
There you go. That's the way it should be.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Peter. Okay.
Thanks so much, everybody. Thanks, Bervyn. It was a great time. Thanks for having me, Michael. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Peter.
For that.
Okay, guys. Have a great day.
Yeah. You too. Bye.
Bye-bye.